We continue with our Aprokshanubhiti. We stopped at science relies on perception and inference. This was the subtopic we had to do. Science does not require trust because science deals with what is perceptible or inferable. Science deals with pratyaksha, perception, and anumana, inference. What can be perceived and what is inferred based on perception. The human intellect is adequate to arrive at an inference based upon what we perceive. When we perceive smoke, we arrive at the conclusion that there is fire because we have seen the coexistence of smoke and fire. Therefore, when we perceive smoke, we can infer that there is fire. That is one kind of knowledge, namely the knowledge of perceptible objects. Knowledge, including scientific knowledge, is therefore of two kinds, pratyaksha and paroksha. Pratyaksha means that which is perceptible, whereas paroksha means that which is imperceptible and must be inferred. The knowledge that we gain with reference to each organ of perception is called pratyaksha. We have 5 organs of perception: hearing, touch, sight, taste, and smell. And each of them is created to perceive or experience its respective objects. There are 5 kinds of objects in the world, and thus there are 5 corresponding organs of perception. All our knowledge comes in this way. Knowledge of objects in the world comes only from these 5 organs of perception. Based on what we perceive, the mind then works to interpret these inputs. This interpretation is what we call inference. Nobody has seen an atom or an electron, for example, so our knowledge of them is all inference based. Most scientific knowledge is by inference. Even though a perception may remain the same, if somebody comes up with different inferential reasoning, the conclusion will be different. Newton said that there is a force called gravity which attracts objects. Scientists now say that there is no gravity, but rather space gets bent in the presence of huge masses. That is how the motion of a particle occurs, and thus there is no gravity. But somebody else may come tomorrow and say something else. This is fine, and it is how things must be. A true scientist knows that a conclusion arrived at by inference can never be final because inference has its basis in perception. Between perception and inference, there is reasoning. Once you perceive, you apply reasoning to arrive at a conclusion regarding what you do not perceive. Next subtopic. Perception and inference relate to the objective world. Pratyaksha means that which is within the range of sense organs and subject to direct knowledge. Paroksha, on the other hand, means that which is beyond the range of sense organs and subject to only indirect knowledge. Sometimes you can verify something that is paroksha. You see smoke at a distance and conclude that there is fire, which you can also go and verify. Both forms of knowledge, pratyaksha and paroksha, perception and inference, are centered upon the objective world. All perception is centered upon the objective world, and inference or indirect knowledge is also based only on perception. You perceive something such as smoke and you infer the fire. Ultimately, all objective knowledge has its basis in perception. What we can perceive becomes the basis for arriving at a conclusion about what is. Fire is perceptible, so you can verify and come to a conclusion as to whether or not fire is there. But there are certain things that are not perceptible, like a boson particle. These things always remain indirect knowledge. We call them nitya paroksha. always indirect. They cannot be verified because they can never become objects of perception. Science deals with these also, and therefore, when somebody comes along with better reasoning, the conclusion will change. This is why science is always changing and evolving, and it will always evolve. As the Brahma Sutras declare, Tarka Apratishthita. Tarka Pratishtanat. Yeah. Because of the inconclusiveness of reasoning. Tarka means reasoning. Apratishtana means inconclusive. In other words, there can be no finality in a conclusion derived from reasoning. All that is required is better reasoning. Important topic now. Science and Vedanta use reasoning differently. We are not interested in proving anything here. We are just saying that these are two types of knowledge, Pratyaksha and Paroksha. Vedanta is not in competition with science, which has a different field of investigation. There is no meeting point at all, even though some Vedantins feel very apologetic and want to prove that we are scientific. But there is no need for that. We do employ reasoning, but we employ it in a different way. Science employs reasoning to arrive at what they do not understand and what they do not see, whereas Vedanta employs reasoning to understand what we see. The Upanishads reveal the reality, which is that you are Brahman. A dialectician will ask, what do you mean, I'm Brahman? How can I be Brahman? But a Vedantin doesn't ask that. The logician will say, my mind says I am not Brahman, so I dismiss the scriptures. Whereas a Vedantin will say, the scriptures say I am Brahman, but my mind thinks I am not Brahman, so I question my mind. This is the point. Whom do you question? A logician questions what is told to him and arrives at his own conclusion, but a Vedantin questions his conclusion. In Vedanta, we do not question what we are told by Shruti, the scriptures, but instead use our intellect to understand what is being told, to understand how I am Brahman and how everything is Brahman. Pujya Swamiji used to say that Ishvara is not to be believed, Ishvara is to be understood. The Upanishads say that what is Ishvara. This is not a question of belief. One has to understand how all this can be Ishvara. The methods of reasoning used are different for science and Vedanta. So there is no need to say that Vedanta is scientific. The rest of the topic, that reality cannot be objectified, we see next time.